right, guys, that's right. We're actually here reviewing a movie. It's not just me and Luke talking about Lost or doing some recaps from last year. We are officially into 2026. It is March 1st. It is the countdown to the Academy Awards has begun. We have 14 days left until we are there. And I am joined once again by my good friend Daniel Mazzarolo. So Daniel, around this time last year was when you asked me to review I'm Still Here, which was the Brazilian entry for foreign film last year. It was nominated for Best Picture last year, and it was the last of the Best Picture nominees that I had yet to see. I watched it. I really, really enjoyed it. We came on to review it last year to absolutely stellar reception. And now this year, when you asked me to do it again for the Brazilian entry this year, that being The Secret Agent, I was actually like, oh, I'm one step ahead of you, because not only did I see this movie, I saw this movie like before everybody else got a chance to at TIFF back in September. This was one of 5 films that Neon picked up that were all foreign films that it's safe to say are some of the best movies that came out last year. So this was, like I said, so this was Brazil's entry. Neon's other acquisitions include No Other Choice from South Korea, Park Chan-wook, legendary filmmaker. You have Surat from Spain, which I just saw recently. You have It Was Just an Accident, Jafar Panahi's entry from Iran. And you have Sentimental Value, obviously, Joachim Trier's follow-up to The Worst Person in the World, and Norway's entry. This premiered at Cannes last year in May. I believe it is actually directed, fun fact, by a former critic himself, Kleber Mendonça Filho, I believe is how you pronounce that. This film stars Wagner Moura, actually in a dual role, one of several dual roles that premiered throughout the year of 2025. So like I said, I'm prepped this year. I'm ready to go. And needless to say, this was to give you guys a little bit of backstory. This was the first movie that I saw at Toronto International Film Festival. For anybody who was following me during my coverage of that last year, let's call some quick technical difficulties there. That's fine. We're good. So for anybody who was following me with my TIFF coverage last year, you will know that this was the first movie that I saw last year at Toronto. I wasn't even checked into my Airbnb at the time when I first saw this. And it was very long. It was very slow. It was very methodical, but also, I would say, kind of a little bit goofy in terms of its approach. But once you actually get through to the end of the film, once you see how the narrative pays off, you will see kind of ultimately why the film takes the approach that it does to the subject matter. So, Daniel, obviously, as the resident Brazilian historian here, what did you think of The Secret Agent, and how did you think what did you think in terms of its comparisons to I'm Still Here last year? And what did you think ultimately, just kind of, as you know, for lack of a better word, this year's Brazil representation this year, especially with it getting, I would say, even more love than I'm Still Here did last year with the Academy Awards?
Well, first of all, Dom, thank you so much for having me again. Also want to say hello to all of our viewers and future viewers. It's funny that you, when you started stating that, I think you said this is the first review, right?
Right.
This year, because in Brazil we have a little motto that the year only starts after Carnival ends.
That's
And
yeah.
Carnival ended last week,
Oh,
so
that's funny.
so the year in Brazil is only starting now. So
Okay.
the fact that we're reviewing a Brazilian movie, and we're going to talk about other movies, of course, and the fact that we are officially starting the year here, it's a cultural coincidence.
There you go.
So Dom, wow, you really started with punch there.
What I do.
I think The Secret Agent is a brilliant movie. I have high expectations for it this year at the Oscars. It was nominated in 4 categories.
It was.
The I'm Still Here was nominated.
I
It was
believe it
nominated
was
in 3
3
categories.
categories. Yes.
Yeah. So the different category that it was nominated this year is actually a new category in the Oscars,
Yes,
which is
it is.
Best Cast.
Yes, that's correct.
Which I think is very appropriate for the movie, because the cast is really excellent, and I
Yes.
think we can. I hope. I mean, I'm sure you have the movie kind of fresh in your mind, especially Tanya Maria, which is the older lady in the
Oh,
movie that
oh,
plays the owner of the
MVP.
little. Yeah,
MVP of the fucking
yeah.
movie.
So she's getting a lot of love in Brazil and outside of Brazil. So I think it's a very appropriate category for us to be in, because really the cast is spectacular. Now, it's very it's very impactful for us that we are having our cinema so recognized in these past few years. Brazilian cinema really, I mean, historically had a boom with a director. I don't know if you know him, but a director called Glauber Rocha.
I don't think I
He's
know him off the top of my head.
I'll recommend you some of his movies.
Please do.
He's really the king of Brazilian movie. Uh he started a movement called Cinema Novo, which means new
New
cinema.
cinema, yes.
And his motto was a camera in your hand and an idea in your brain. And with that you could do whatever you wanted cinematically. So he's really a very prominent filmmaker in Brazil, probably the biggest gem we have. Very experimental, very political. You have probably realized that I wouldn't say only Brazilian movies, but Latin American movies in general are very political. Uh,
Understandably so.
Understandably so, based on our history. Why am I telling you this? Because the Brazilian, after our dictatorship ended, and we discussed a little the dictatorship last
Yep.
year, it's a recurring theme. We we had there was a moment where the arts and movies, especially in the beginning of the 90s, because of a very bad president we had a downfall, and then we saw a resurgence of Brazilian movie with with a few films that came out in the late 90s and in the beginning of the 2000s. Um, a movie called Carlota Joaquina, a movie called O Quatrilho. These are movies considered to bring back the breadth of Brazilian movies, leading up to this very spectacular filmmaker. And now I'm just going to correct your pronunciation on
Please
one
do. I'm sure
aspect,
I butchered it.
because his name is Kleber Mendonça,
Don't
because it's that C with a little snake underneath that we pronounce it
make
kind of like an S.
yes.
So Kleber Mendonça Filho. um his biggest first movie was, how do you call it in English? I think it's Surrounding Sounds or Neighboring Sounds or something like
I'll
that.
check.
In Portuguese it's called O Som ao Redor.
Yes.
um
Usumo neighboring sounds.
Neighboring Sounds. Really gave attention to him, and ever since, he's done Aquarius, he's done
I see
Bacurau,
Bacurau, yep.
Assombrações do Recife Velho, which is something like the haunting of old Recife or something like that in English, and now with The Secret Agent. So just historicizing a little bit this director that has been consistently producing very, very good, interesting movies, very connected to the zeitgeist of Brazilian historical moments and cultural moments, which, as a spectator of movies, to me, it's always astonishing to see these writers and directors that can really capture the moment and really transform that into art and understand poetically what's going on and put it on, in a screen or a or a book or whatever art form. um why am I saying this? Because we had a lot of Oscar nominations last year for I'm Still Here. You and we recorded the podcast before the Oscars, just like
Yep.
we're doing this year. So I'm very proud here, if anybody's following us that doesn't know, that we did win Brazil's first Oscar for I'm Still Here.
Wait, that was your
Best
guys' first Oscar?
in the world. Yes, first Oscar ever
Wow.
for Brazil. Um, uh, I think we've had like a Brazilian costume designer win an Oscar, but for like a Swedish movie or something like that,
Oh,
But
okay.
a legitimate Brazilian Oscar, that was the first one for best foreign picture. I don't even know if that's the official title of the category
Best foreign
anymore.
film,
Best
best foreign movie.
international picture,
Close enough.
best non-English speaking picture. So that was we had our first Oscar presented by Penelope Cruz, and it was, the country just went insane. Especially if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it was in the middle of Carnival last year or right after Carnival. So it was a very celebratory moment. And now with The Secret Agent, we are competing in 4 categories. But Dom, I would also like to give a shout out to a cinematographer called Adolfo Veloso, who is nominated for Train Dreams, for
Yes.
best
For best
photography,
cinematography.
best
Yes.
cinematography.
Yep.
and he's Brazilian. So we are actually running in 5 categories this
Look at
year
that.
as Brazilian representation, and that's very exciting. So Brazilian movies have been recognized by the industry, by the academy, by spectators. It's very exciting to see the whole world, engaging in our culture, engaging in our language, engaging in our history. And it's not by chance also that the themes of the movies from last year and this year are so similar, right? So
Yes,
both of
very
them
much so.
speak, very much so, both of them speak on the Brazilian dictatorship, which we discussed deeply last year, but that also, I'm happy to bring reminders and to mention, of course, from different aspects. So that's
Right.
interesting for us to talk about also.
Exactly. And given what just happened in the world yesterday, I feel like that subject matter is becoming, it has never not been more relevant.
Yeah. And it's curious that I actually watched It Was Just an Accident yesterday.
There you
So
go. And another movie
that
who's
was
also dealing
crazy.
with the immediate after effects of a dictatorship and the specific effects on the populace.
Yes. Um, so I guess those are my beginning takes for the movies,
Right.
for the movie. And yeah, so we're very excited. We're very hopeful. Let's see what's going to happen this year.
Indeed. Man, if there's one thing that I love, not just about watching Brazilian movies, but like about seeing, is really just the sense of community that you guys have around your cinema. And I would say that more so, because obviously we all know, anybody who is, obviously been invested in the cinema landscape has seen it become just so much more international. And part of that obviously is because of accessibility, because of streaming. But, one of the few good things that has come out of streaming. But the ability, I would say the level of access that
I'm back.
yeah, you're good. The level of access that obviously not just Brazilian films, but all foreign films has never been better. But the level of, I would say, of community, of camaraderie, the way that you guys really turn out to support your filmmakers, your films, and it pays off ultimately. I'm Still Here won the foreign film category last year. The Secret Agent right now, I would say, is the top pick for international film this year. Wagner Moura, even though obviously Timothée Chalamet has been a little bit of the favorite for Best Actor, the fact that Wagner Moura not only got nominated, but I would say is the fact that he is kind of a very well-recognized face as well. Throughout the last couple of years, he first became notable for his portrayal of Pablo Escobar on the Narcos Netflix series, which I can't believe that it's been a decade since that series premiered. But all of that is to say that kind of the level of camaraderie and community that comes from the cinemascape has never been stronger, I would say. And the fact that obviously, you have a studio like Neon recognizing that and really putting that to the forefront. Because the other thing that I love as well, not just about Brazilian films, but about the foreign films in general, is you guys are kind of filling the gap that I would say the American film market has kind of let lapse ultimately at the end of the day. You guys are the ones that are really taking the risks. You guys are the ones that are really kind of showing what it is that cinema is still capable of as a medium, as a storytelling format, as a way to kind of remind the world, no, this is still very, very much kind of what is, these things that you think may have passed. Obviously this is another 70s set period piece, but it is constantly there to remind people this is still very much prescient. This is still very much happening in the world, but you're finding new and different and such creative ways to do it. Like everything that I saw in this movie, I'm like, this is stuff that I still feel like I'm watching, like reminding me what it is that made me fall in love with movies, with cinema in the first place. This is kind of still taking such bold and new, different ways of stories. The way that the sound is recorded, the way that the scenes are edited together, the way that the characters kind of will just enter and exit the frame. The action sequences that happen here. There's an entire sequence that happens in this movie of a leg just jumping around, kicking people, that in any other movie would be like, what is happening here? What is this sequence? But within the context of the movie, given that also, considering that this is a movie that is very much what's called, paying homage to cinema as well. So much of this movie is set around the fact that the characters are viewing Jaws for the first time, and so much of this is set in and around a movie theater, that whole stuff that just feels so kind of precious and prevalent. And these are the things that I wish American movies were still doing, but the fact that the international films are kind of all stepping in and filling that void, it just makes me very happy. So now that we've kind of gotten yes.
No, just touching on that subject, and also absolutely, obviously, no intention to romanticize lack of infrastructure or support
Right.
or anything like that. But um, I think in Latin America in general, and this goes for cinema, this goes for theater, this goes for literature, this goes for the visual arts, there really is an inclination towards experimentation in general.
Right.
And I think that is cultural as well, but I think it, also coming from places where the industry is not as strong as in the United States, and
Right.
there's not as much finance and money. We really have to get creative.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the aspects that allows Latin American movies, but also, we're talking about Middle Eastern movies. We have Scandinavian movies, which I think Europe, they're closer to the United States in this aspect of finance and all. But it really forces us to experiment and to try out things. So speaking specifically of The Secret Agent, there's so many aesthetic choices that are not obvious, that are not linear, that really when you're watching it, it creates what like a poetic short circuit in your brain, because um, it's not about just a linear storytelling. You can see that there is thought towards what you were mentioning, the editing, the sound, the cinematography. There's something really interesting that I would like to point out, for example, about sentimental value.
Yes.
And despite I'm not a huge connoisseur of Norwegian films, but I do know a lot. I don't know a lot. I've watched a lot of Bergman movies, who is
Right.
Swedish, and I'm sure there are similarities with the
Of course.
Scandinavian culture up there, of shots, where you're focused on on the person who's not talking, for example, or that the focus of that screen, of that shot, is the person who's listening, or he's filming someone doing an action and the person who's talking is off screen.
Yes.
And I mean, of course, that's simple, it's just an example, but how those are aesthetic choices for us, the audience, to watch, that it's like, why am I not seeing who's talking? Like, why am I looking at this person, as opposed to what I think maybe American movie in general, like Hollywood, has, is of very, obvious slice of life. I'm watching this as if, I'm spying through a little hole, and
Right.
which is
Fly on the
cool
wall,
also,
if you will,
obviously.
was a popular phrase that I heard in film school.
Which what?
Fly on the wall is a popular
Fly
term
on the
that I heard
wall.
in film
Yeah,
school.
exactly. As opposed to, some really real experimentation. And maybe we can go as far as talking about Bertolt Brecht here, in aspects of using formal structure to, play around with these aesthetic choices.
Yes.
So I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. It's so funny that you bring up sentimental value because, so as I mentioned, Secret Agent was the first movie that I saw at TIFF this past year. The second movie that I saw at TIFF this past year was Sentimental Value, and the third movie that I saw was one of the other Neon Five that you were unable to see, but I talked about it plenty on my channel, that being Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice. So those were the first three movies that I saw all back to back in a row at TIFF this past
Wow.
year. And what's so interesting about all three of those movies, again, so you're talking Brazil, Norway, South Korea, three like completely different regions of the world, three completely different places culturally, and all through the language of cinema, I saw similarities across all three of those movies concerning subject matter, concerning means of kind of, almost generated. Like, all three of these movies have a very dreamlike quality to them, where you watch certain scenes and you're not sure, because of the way that it's being presented, whether it's reality or whether it's a dream. No Other Choice specifically, I talked about this a lot, about how Park Chan-wook with that movie is able to kind of interlace kind of reality with dream, only in this case in the sense of it being a nightmare, because the opening scene of that movie, without spoiling anything, because I know you haven't seen it, is introduces a dream. This guy has everything that he's ever wanted in his life. He has this almost like beautiful voyeuristic life. And it's all set up in the purpose of, for it to be taken away from him ultimately once, the Americans come in and buy up the paper factory that he works at. And it's very interesting how all three of those movies, despite being about vastly different things, one is concerning the idea of, generational trauma across families. One being about, how capitalist systems are destroying the middle class and forcing people to resort to drastic actions in order to survive. One being about a guy who is ultimately, in the case of The Secret Agent, ultimately, I love how it's presented. You see the title, you immediately assume, oh, it's going to be a spy drama. And it is, but not in the manner in which you've come to kind of expect from the American media complex. It's ultimately more of like, I feel like this movie has more in common with All the President's Men than something, say, like a Jason Bourne movie or like a more traditional action movie, where this guy is ultimately just, just doing research and ultimately just trying to keep it on the down low as, he's being hunted by agents of the regime that's in charge. So it's so interesting, kind of all these different little filmmaking tricks and like flipping genre on its head in order to kind of give you movies that you have seen stories told like this before, but never really presented in the way that it is presented here.
There's something about The Secret Agent that I think is really cool for us to have seen I'm Still Here last year and to watch The Secret Agent this year, because they are both speaking about the military dictatorship. They are, however, set in different moments of the dictatorship, because the dictatorship lasted 20 years and there were moments where things were a little more surveilled and a little stronger with with the tortures and the assassinations.
Right.
And a bit later things started to get a little, started the transition towards going back to a democracy. So they're set in different points, but what I think is so brilliant, especially when we're able to look at these two in contrast like we can do now, how I think The Secret Agent shows a side of the dictatorship that is kind of like the real people's dictatorship, in the
Right.
sense I'm going to explain.
Right. They don't
I'm
feel like this kind of evil overarching empire. They feel kind of like just like people ultimately, kind of
because
in the same way that
life
our
goes
characters do.
on, right?
Right.
So what's cool is that in I'm Still Here, we're talking about a woman who's the widow of a congressman who was tortured and murdered. So it's really about that someone who is a protagonist in the resistance against the dictatorship, and really lives the worst parts of the dictatorships, the tortures, the murders, the illegal prisons. Um, and all of the family involved in that. And then in The Secret Agent, you're kind of shown the Brazilian average normal population that's enjoying carnival in the
Right.
middle of these said tortures and assassinations in prisons, because it's kind of showing, life goes on, and horrible things were happening during these 20 years, but people still in their subjective day-to-day life, they had their joys, they had their sorrows, they had their celebrations. So
Nope. Sorry, you got cut
sorry,
off in the middle there. No,
I
you're
don't know
good.
I don't know if it's
I
my
don't know what
connection.
I don't think it's you. There's been some technical difficulties all day, real quick. But so
Okay, oh really? Okay.
yeah. So it's not you. Trust me.
But anyway, so that you're faced with so many scenes of people in the street carnival parties, and the carnival in Brazil is probably the biggest party in the world. It's something that we wait the whole year to arrive,
Right.
and everyone's just so joyous and so happy. And I think it's brilliant that Kleber Mendonça Filho staged this moment during the carnival. Um, and you get to see some very weird, again, aesthetic choices that I think are super interesting, of the chief of the police, like this bald fat old guy, very with very masculine, and then he's with makeup on and glitter because it's carnival, and this guy, he's like leaving the police station, but he's wearing a costume and his face is painted. And I don't know how this resonates to Americans or other people, but us Brazilians, we look at this and for us it's so normal, because it's like, of course he has glitter on. It's carnival, like
Right.
everyone is out in costumes and whatever. And but just to show kind of like the stoicism of a life that continues, and also of a population that, so many people, it's kind of like what you see in the United States. So it's kind of like, maybe a little apolitical, like, the regime doesn't really matter as long as if I have food on my table, or as long as I'm getting my salary. And um and uh, Kleber Mendonça, he says this in a moment of an economic moment of the Brazilian dictatorship, which in Portuguese we call milagre econômico, which is the economic miracle, let's put it like that, and very just saying this like very summarized, but it was a promise of a great economic project that was going to happen, developed by the militaries that would support the military dictatorship in the sense like, look how a military dictatorship is so good because look at the economy of the country.
Right.
And for a moment, things did go very well, but it was one of those kinds of projects that has a due date. It has an expiration date because there's no miracle. So when it starts kind of fading away and people start understanding that this was not a miracle, it was just a few fake years. And he sets it right at this moment. So not only are we talking about the Brazilian dictatorship, not only is there like a carnival background, which I think aesthetically is beautiful, there's also a class struggle and an economic class approach to this specific historical moment of what's going on during the dictatorship, and also the characters that he chooses and the city where he sets it. Because in I'm Still Here, we're seeing a lot of Rio, we're seeing a lot of São Paulo, which
Yes.
are of course the two major cities in Brazil. And in The Secret Agent, we're looking at Recife, which is a very, very prominent, important northeastern capital. It's the capital of the state of Pernambuco. Um, Surely one of the biggest and most important cities in Brazil, but doesn't have the notoriety that São Paulo or Rio have. And that is where Kleber Mendonça Filho is from. Wagner Moura is also from the Northeast. He's from a state called Bahia. So it kind of dislocates, the narrative of the Brazilian dictatorship to an area that is not commonly seen, not even in Brazil, and what's to say outside of Brazil for other countries and people to watch.
It's I so much to respond to there. My first thing obviously is you're right. I love how this movie, and I guess in contrast to I'm Still Here, how it kind of focuses more on like the day-to-day life. I'm Still Here was so concentrated on like kind of the immediate effects that the dictatorship had on the people, how it would like rip families apart, and was ultimately more so a statement on the fortitude that people had to still continue, to still go on, to still continue to fight. Versus this movie is very much about kind of getting lost in the mundanity, if you will. And when I say mundanity, I don't mean that in terms of like a negative context, more so in, like you were saying, the daily, the everyday life.
Yeah, it's the mundane. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
People are still just going out. They're going to work. They're going to party, because it's carnival. It's fun. It's celebratory times. They're going to the movies. They're going to all this stuff. So what's so impressive to me about the narrative is how ultimately the narrative is really taking place in the background to everything that is happening, kind of in the force, the everyday sort of kind of comings and goings of the residents of the hotel, I guess you could say, where he's staying. The main character is really the focus in the forefront. You mentioned the actress who portrays the kind of the caretaker, the woman who is kind of maintaining this place where all of these different kind of refugees are coming in and out of. Donna Sebastiana, I believe is her name, played by Tanya Maria. Who it's just one of those things where as soon as I see her, I'm like, MVP of the movie, MVP of the freaking movie.
Yeah.
You can just tell she is old, she is grizzled, she has seen it all. She has seen this country at its best, she has seen this country at its worst, and she does not give a fuck about anything. She just goes throughout her life, and I'm like, those are always the characters that I kind of gravitate towards, that I enjoy the most. And
do you remember that Fernanda Torres, of course, her mother,
yes,
Fernanda Montenegro,
yes,
who played Eunice Paiva older,
yes,
and who was nominated for an Oscar for Central Station
yes,
in 98.
Yes.
So there was a picture that was taken like on Instagram online of Fernanda Montenegro and Tanya Maria together.
Yes.
And that was also like it blew up the internet when they got together.
That. Yeah.
Two great Brazilian actresses together.
Absolutely. And it's just absolutely legendary. And going to Wagner's character. So Wagner portrays, it's funny because we're once again playing around with a little bit of identity here, because he is playing a guy who is ultimately his real name in the movie is, let me make sure I get this right here. So it's his real name is Armando Solimos. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And he's going under the undercover name of Marcelo Alves. But you also get a little bit of a twist where at the end, so throughout the movie takes place primarily in 77, but there will be random cuts to the modern day ultimately of these kind of two younger researchers. I assume they're college level, who are kind of doing research into kind of the past
Which is, I
events
mean,
of
it's a
this.
shock the first time it happens,
Right,
right? We're
right.
like,
There's no
what
kind
the
of
fuck is going
indication.
on?
There's no indication. There's no kind of like letting the audience know. There's no holding the audience's hand. They'll just randomly cut to it, and it's kind of on you as the audience in order to kind of figure out what is going on here. And at the end, after the crazy events that happened in the third act of this movie, you see Wagner, but like in the future, and you're like, what's going on? And that's when it clicks together. You're like, oh, he's also portraying, in addition to obviously, the main character in the 70s, you also establish he is a father. He is trying to reestablish this relationship, to his son. He's doing research into, what happened to his wife, who presumably was also taken during the height of the dictatorship, several years before the events of this. And then you realize, oh, he's also portraying the older version of the son. And you realize that the entire film and is being told from the perspective of the son, how he remembered it, which explains for some of the more, I'm going to say, confusing elements of the movie. Like, obviously, the kind of the adoration of Jaws, the connection between the leg that's jumping around, because there'll be certain moments in the movie where you'll just cut to like this really bizarre, surrealist moment. And you're like, what is going on? What is the purpose of this? What is this contributing to the narrative? And then as soon as you realize that, like, oh, it's because it's from a little kid's perspective, a little kid's kind of memory of this time. Also, again, tying into the movie and tying into, again, its presentation, playing around with memory, playing around with perspective, being like, oh, how different people remember certain different times differently. It also explains for, again, kind of, I guess, for lack of word, the more laissez-faire attitude that this movie takes towards its time period. You're like, oh, why would it seem like this seems like more of an innocent time? Because it's from a child's perspective. A child is always going to have a more innocent point of view of a perspective, because naturally all the adults in his life are going to do the best job that they can in terms of protecting them from some of the horrors of the world, but they're still going to be consciously aware of it ultimately.
That's really interesting to touch on, because of course we were going to talk about the hairy leg at one point.
Right.
Kleber's movies always have at least one moment of surrealism, let's put it like that.
Right.
If you watch Neighboring Sounds one day, and I strongly recommend you do,
Okay.
it's really, really good. There's a scene, this isn't a spoiler, but there's just a scene where one of the characters goes to a waterfall, and suddenly the waterfall becomes all red and bloody, and
Ooh.
the movie is very realistic up to that point. And then there's just one scene where the audience, and again, I think obviously this is a choice, where the audience is like, okay, yeah, it's a movie, I'm not a fly on the wall. There's always something
Right.
that just reminds you, and there's like a poetic approach to it. So the hairy leg scene really, I think I've seen all of his movies. Like, it wasn't very surprising to me to have
Right.
something like that happen. Um, but it's so particular, and I'm going to explain a little bit about this to you. It's so particular of Recife, because during the dictatorship, we had censors, right? So the
Right.
censors would be at the newspapers, the censors would be in the theaters. So many plays were censored, so many actors. After a play ended, actors would hide backstage in the costume box, so they wouldn't get beaten up by the dictatorship agents, because so much of the plays were political and they were denouncing the dictatorship.
Right.
And what's funny is, we have a lot of singers that would protest, metaphorically and poetically. And of course, the militaries were so stupid, they couldn't understand what it was. So they
Right.
started censoring everything,
Right.
just in case they were talking badly about the dictatorship, because they didn't have the intellectual capacity to understand when a song or a play was a critic, or when it wasn't.
Right.
Because stupid people. um
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm telling you this because the censors at the newspapers, they would, because the newspapers had to come out like immediately, the censors would take the parts of the articles that they didn't want to come out, and they would put uh, cooking recipes. So you would be reading a newspaper, and it would be like, oh, the current president said, met with an international leader so and so, and suddenly 2 eggs, 4 ounces of flour, one milk, or whatever, and that was normal. And of course, people knew that that meant that this was censored. But in Recife specifically, there was this urban legend about this hairy leg. Uh,
Okay.
and Kleber, he puts this scene in kind of like a cruising point of gay men, but also of straight couples that are there in
Right.
this cruising. And this, so there's like this moralistic puritanical approach of the dictatorship also, obviously. uh but in Recife, in not only did they have the recipes, but they would print out articles about this supposed hairy leg that was attacking people, um, when they wanted to censor an article. So this isn't something that happened in the whole country. I know that it's very specific to Recife, but so everyone who's from the state of Pernambuco really understood this moment, and the rest of us were kind of like, "Oh, let me see what this hairy leg is about," because
Got it.
that didn't really happen in São Paulo or Rio, but it was also, so it's also a metaphor of the censorship of the military dictatorship. The scene where the hairy leg is hitting people at the cruising spot,
Right.
um, because they would put out articles about this hairy leg beating up people
That's
to
awesome.
not put out the real articles that the journalists were trying to write about.
That's awesome. And that's so cool because not only that's the thing that would be that's like so specific where again you would like have to be so familiar of not only obviously the culture but obviously this specific state and this specific period of time in order to kind of understand like that reference and what it's symbolizing. And that's so cool honestly that he puts that in there because that's again like that's something that Kleber, obviously being from that region, would obviously be very familiar with. He would have grown up
Yeah.
around that. Because he was born in 1968, so that would make him like around like I would say like a young man, obviously when a little
Hmm.
kid into a young man when this is all going on. So oh, that's so cool. I love that, and I love too how again he's putting that there to be like if you're from this region and you understand what this is, great. Like this is also like that thing that is only going to be like completely understood and well like by like a certain microsect and everybody else who's like kind of not familiar with that is going to kind of scratch their heads and be like
Yeah.
but it's going to make you want to go. It's going to make you want to go and do the research. And if you're willing and patient enough to go and do the work, it's even more rewarding. I love shit like that. I love
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
when filmmakers do shit like that in their films. It's funny because it's one of those things where again it kind of contributes to the overall identity of the film as far as being like um dealing with metaphor, dealing with censorship. So obviously it's tying into the fact that the dictatorship, while still being very prevalent, that kind of, I would say, would you say that this was kind of a period where the worst was starting to come behind, was starting to come behind? Like you guys were like just starting to emerge from it or like it was kind
Yeah.
of,
Yeah, it's definitely like a different moment from The Secret Agent.
you mean
If
from I'm
I'm
Still
if
Here, you
I'm
mean?
from I'm Still Here.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, this movie is set in the late 70s. I think it's
Yes. 77.
1977. Where, we had a military president that supposedly was because we had two military presidents that are known to be like the worst ones of all.
Mm,
I think there were five in total during those 20 years. And the late 70s was one that was, considered a little lighter and starting the transition. But as
right.
you can see in The Secret Agent, like the horrible things were still
Oh no,
happening.
they were
Um,
absolutely still happening for sure.
yeah.
But again, I guess kind of the reason why I asked that is because it really contributes overall to why this movie, despite the very heavy subject matter, still has, I guess, for lack of a better word, has a little bit of a lighter touch to it. Like I said,
Mhm.
obviously these characters are all operating under the fact that yeah, like if any one of our covers are blown, we could, we'll be arrested and and
Yeah.
killed. But there's a reason why this has like kind of more of a laissez-faire, lackadaisical kind of feel to it. The fact that
Yeah.
the hairy leg, the jumping leg acts as both kind of a moment of surrealism and also kind of a metaphor for the censorship that was happening, while also being again such a specific reference to that one region of the country.
Yeah. And a little funny,
And
right?
again, it's funny. It is a funny sequence the way that plays out. So
Yeah, I think it's really cool that that you're talking about also, um how having the movie from last year and this year, just to see the tentacles of the dictatorship. Because if last year's movie I'm Still Here is a direct conflict between as I said, like a resistance congressman,
Right.
a family more progressive against the dictatorship, and the agents themselves, like the institution itself of the military dictatorship. Here you see a conflict based on breaking a patent of a university research, a technological dispute that he is not necessarily going up against the government.
Right.
This is an institutional university research dispute, which involves money, of course, but you see the tentacles of the dictatorship just going everywhere in the
Right.
country, because this guy was and we can say spoilers,
Yeah. Yeah.
Dom, is
Yeah. Yeah.
that
We're
okay?
we're far
Like,
we're far enough that we can do spoilers.
he's murdered for something that is not like a direct political
Right.
conflict, but it's you know, it's a university conflict, it's a technological conflict, it's a research conflict,
Right.
it's a patent breaking conflict,
Right.
where the military dictatorship has its puppets in all of these places of power.
Right.
So you are just, you know, you just have to deal with that kind of stuff
Right.
in every instance, in school, in the universities, on the streets, just everywhere. So I think that's also an aspect that's nice to point out,
Yeah.
how even when you're not fighting the system itself, the tentacles are everywhere, and you
Exactly.
have to deal with that kind of corruption.
I like how it's ultimately administrative. It's an administrative based
Yeah.
kind of conflict. And like you said, the fact that even though the worst I would say is kind of behind them, it's very much still like the tentacles are there and have infused their way into every single institution. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why the danger is still there, because he has chosen to ultimately immerse himself in this institution. And so even though he's kind of trying to, cross all his T's and dot all his I's, there is still very much that kind of overhanging danger. But the fact that it results in a third act that I would say is intentionally confusing. It is very, very intentionally confusing how it's like, oh, you have the agent, combating with this one hitman that's been desired. And it almost feels like when the murder finally happens at the end, it almost feels like it's done by accident ultimately, because he gets the drop on the one guy, but then the other guys come in. And then it cuts to obviously the end talking with his kid who's now an adult. And he's basically saying, yeah, there's just that period of his life that I barely remember anything about it, which almost is of itself this greater commentary on how it's not that people have like willfully forgot, but just because of just the amount of confusion that was caused, obviously, by what's it called, and obviously the fact that there's not as much technology, so the dissemination of information throughout the different levels is also going to be intentionally confusing because of that. I think all of that is brilliant in terms of its execution, and it's one of those
Yeah.
things where, again, if this was done obviously in America, it would be so straightforward, it would be so boring, they would be holding the audience's hand. But the fact that Kleber so specifically chooses to demonstrate it in this way, I think it's indicative of the film's greatest strength overall.
I think this is something that I really wanted to point out at some moment. I think this is the time that the fact that we discovered that he was murdered in the modern day time period,
Right.
through them checking out that screen of the two girls during the research,
Right.
instead of the obvious choice of showing us the scene of him being murdered.
Right.
That's when I say, like, absolute cinema.
Yes.
It's uh the fact that he doesn't rely on the melodramatic uh
Right.
sensation of
Right.
showing us the scene of the
Yeah.
main character being murdered, and he just like awes us with a newspaper article that in the future we just see a picture of him lying down, and then like so and so was murdered or whatever,
Right.
and we're like, fuck, he got
Oh,
murdered,
yeah.
but
And
we
it
don't
ties
have to
in.
see the scene. that is, to me, that is so sophisticated. It's so brilliant.
It ties in perfectly also with the theme of the movie, which again, this is a movie ultimately about journalists, about researchers. Ironically, I would say some of the most fervent resistors to dictatorship in general, because what is the number one way in which a dictatorship is able to, control its population? Suppress,
The media,
control,
yeah.
and confuse, ultimately using the media. And so
Yeah.
I think that's so brilliant how the narrative device of the movie is ultimately all through research, and how kind of in a way it's almost, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I feel like the modern day storyline, they're used so few and far between throughout the movie, but so deliberately used, because that to me is the way of a kind of, the modern day generation, I would say. I don't know if you would say, like, 'cause I don't remember exactly when the modern day timeline takes place, but it's almost like, if you will, like, you're millennial, I'm early Gen Z, but it's like the modern day kind of reckoning with the sins of the past, if you will, through the exact methods and metrics in which the dictatorship used to suppress the flow of information.
Absolutely. I would also, I think she deserves a shout out. The actress who plays his wife,
Yes.
Alice Carvalho. So she's in one scene, which is the restaurant scene,
Right.
and I just think she blows that out of the park. Alice Carvalho is for sure a rising star in Brazil right now. She's been doing some very, very significant TV shows, series, soap operas, movies, and I think she also deserves a shout out. She's just phenomenal. She's a
Yeah.
phenomenal actress.
And that scene was so good, also in terms of how it
That
was
scene is
edited
so good.
into the movie. Like, again, this just shows how good this movie is. There will be scenes where, again, because it's not trying to hold the audience's hand, it's not trying to like
Yeah.
deliberately tell you this is a flashback, this is a flash forward. Like, again, they'll just have these scenes cut, that happen in the middle of the narratives, and it really is up to the audience to figure out, oh, this is a flashback, this is not happening within the current flow of the narrative, ultimately. And the fact that, again, the conversations, the way the dialogue is written, it is all so matter of fact. It is all just like, oh, these are just normal discussions that they would be having. They're not trying to like dispel obvious plot points too, but it really is, again, all of the all of the important stuff is happening in the background. And that to me is, again, the marking of a good film, when it really forces you to pay attention, because if you miss even a little nugget, you're going to miss something important.
Absolutely. Yeah, you and that's when I say kind of like, I think there's the Brecht influence in that sense, that you need to put the pieces together, right? So
Yes.
it's not given to you on a tray like, oh, this is what it's about, this is what you have to think, but it really puts you on the edge of your seat, and you're like, you get
Yeah.
confused
It
sometimes of
turns you
what's going
into an
on, and
investigator almost, where you're kind of looking for all the little puzzle pieces to put
yeah,
together.
we're the secret agent.
Yeah, literally. No, but that, if anything, that's it. And
Yeah.
as we're getting close to the end of our hour here, I think that's a perfect place to start to begin the wrap up of the conversation, where it ultimately, you're constantly wondering throughout the course of this movie, who is the secret agent? Because I don't know if this character that we're told is the secret agent is the secret agent, and then you realize it's
Yeah.
kind of almost pulling a little bit of something similar to what Bong Joon-ho did with his premiere movie, Memories of Murder, which is very, very heavily influenced by Seven, where the entire movie they're looking for this murderer, and the ending of that movie does something so brilliant, where the main character, the main detective, realizes that, oh, he looks out at the audience and he realizes, oh shit, the killer is out of the audience. The killer has been watching the movie this whole time, basically telling us, the audience, oh, any one of us could be the killer. And this movie does something similar, where you realize, oh, we, the audience, have been the secret agent trying to piece all of this information together. So I'm like, I love when movies like kind of do like kind of like a meta thing. Like it makes the audience a part of the film narrative, which is already something that's so difficult to do with a
Yeah.
traditionalist narrative film.
Yeah, we definitely have to fill in the gaps for that. So, Dom, wow, I can't believe it's been almost an hour. So
Crazy.
I would like I want to touch on a subject that, after watching the two other movies, really got me thinking.
Right.
So speaking about the secret agent and sentimental value, and it was just an accident,
Right.
right? So to me, it's so it was just an accident. Of course, they're talking about the regime in Iran.
Right.
There are similarities, of course, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of these are people that are resisting the autocratic, theocratic regime in Iran, And there's something about the comparison about these three movies that is, I feel that Sentimental Value, which is a Scandinavian European movie,
Right.
is so I I it's about, like, the intersubjective relationships of a family. It's a very
Right.
private movie.
Right.
It's about a father and daughters and the grandchildren, and, I actually I saw it a couple of days ago, and I thought it was so curious that in the beginning of the movie, the character that plays the daughter is, rehearsing a monologue from The Seagull, right? From
Right.
Nina from The Seagull,
Yes.
because I was in The Seagull,
Oh, so you know.
like, I played Treplev, like, 15 years ago
Oh, wow.
in São Paulo, so it's a play I know very well,
Yeah.
and it really is a play, among other things, but a conflict between the new generation and the old
And the old
generation,
as
right?
well, also
So
the fact that the father has kind of not almost like this contempt for theater, if
yeah.
you will, which is one of several reasons
Yeah,
why. Yeah.
exactly. So there's like this mirror, right? So the new generation's trying to create something new, and the old generation's kind of resisting it.
Right.
And I thought it was so curious that in Sentimental Value, there's almost an opposite of that, where the father feels like he's the more progressive avant-garde
Right.
figure, and the daughter, he says to the daughter things like, why do you keep doing like these century-old shows, you know, that
Right.
everyone, like, do something new.
Right.
And he's doing like these experimental movies, and I thought that was super interesting to watch, that like this almost this inverted
Yeah.
conflict between old and new, where the old person is the one who's trying to bring up the new
I didn't
ideas.
think about
Um,
that, but it's so true.
yeah, but anyway, that's not really where I wanted to get to. It's more about how it it's to me, from a historical point of view, it's not a coincidence that the European movie. I haven't seen Sirat, but I can only speak about these three, is the one that's talking about the intersubjective relationships of the characters. It's a family conflict of individuals. Now, I will point out that there is a moment where they are confronted with the idea that the grandmother was
Was taken away.
opposed the Nazis,
Yes.
and she was tortured for 2 years. So there is a political ghost in this family
Yes.
of a matriarch that ended up committing suicide because she just couldn't deal with the tortures that she had lived, and with the Nazi regime. That I was actually shocked when I went to Berlin once and went to the Holocaust Museum and saw how many Norwegians had been
Yes.
murdered, because in school I just didn't have the notion that the Nazis had gone so far up.
Yes.
Um, and they did. So she resisted the Nazi regime and was imprisoned and tortured. But other than that, it's a very private
Yes.
movie,
Yes.
and I don't think that it's a coincidence that the Middle Eastern movie and the Latin American movie are more political in that
Very,
sense.
very much
And
so.
they are speaking about individuals, but as a metonymy to speak of the whole.
Broadly
Um,
about the countries being influenced
about
directly
the
by the dictators.
countries.
Exactly. And
So
yeah.
just to me, I mean, it's as a Latin American artist, it just shows historically the importance of these political movements in the arts in Latin America, and now I assume also in the Middle East. I'm also not a huge connoisseur of Middle Eastern movies. I love Abbas Kiarostami from Iran. I don't know if you've
Yes.
ever seen any of his movies.
I have not.
Uh,
No. I will admit my Middle Eastern film viewing is definitely not as high as it should be. There were a couple of important ones that I saw in film school as well. But real quick, back to the sentimental value point, in kind of contrast to the it was just an accident and the secret agent. No, but I love that you brought that up, because again, it shows just how important kind of the culture, obviously, of each of these films informs them. The fact that sentimental value is, despite dealing with this subject matter as well, is very intimate. It's very private. It
yeah,
is very much about how this specific family has been impacted, and how, again, that kind of generational trauma informs them. The fact that, again, this house that they all reside in
yeah.
has been in their
Mhm.
family for so many different generations, going back years. There have been members of their family that were born in and died in this house, versus it was just an accident, like you were saying. Despite also, again, a very, very funny movie, despite the subject matter that it's dealing with, how that movie is using its characters as a voyeur into kind of the kind of overall hurt that the overall trauma that the country itself is dealing with as a result of what of the harm that this regime inflicted upon its citizens. And kind of again, there's a reason why I constantly bring up all these films that Neon acquired from Cannes Film Festival and all put out this past year, because I feel like all of these films, including No Other Choice and Surat, which while also Surat was another one which I won't get too deep into, but also is constantly has in the background, oh, like the military shows up and breaks up a rave at one point. They're constantly listening to radio commercials of kind of what's going on in the world, and how I feel like all of these films are in active conversation with each other about kind of the harm that is being done to the individual people by these regimes. And I really, really appreciate that, because at the end of the day, the individual people are, to pull a very, very impactful quote from my beloved Game of Thrones. Why is it that the commoners are always the ones that suffer when these high lords play their Game of Thrones? I think that there's a reason why that statement is truly a universal statement. And all of these films seem to be an active conversation about that. And they're all ultimately about kind of the residual effects, the residual trauma that people still to this day are bearing and dealing with as a result of, the trauma of dictatorships of the past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so phenomenal to just watch culture and history of different regions and countries just bubbling up into the artistic production of said regions and countries, and how none of this is a coincidence, because it's
Nothing is a
just
coincidence.
it's just a demonstration and an application of the hardships and the realities that each region, each culture in the world has lived.
Yes.
And how we process it as a community poetically. That's impressive to watch. And just to finish, I just want something I wanted to point out when I watched, and because I do appreciate Iranian cinema, I just like to point out the landscape aspect, because it's something you were talking a little bit about American movies, and it's something that we don't see in Hollywood a lot.
It's
But
true.
Jafar does it, and I know Kiarostami did it, of course. And even we were talking about Scandinavian movies. Bergman also did this a lot.
Bergman,
But
half of Bergman's again, the filmography was all about landscapes and use of it.
So those shots it was just an accident with the little cactus and the dry land and
far
how
out desert vistas, the fact that
exactly how the landscape
so small against the backdrop.
Exactly how the landscape becomes a character. And we're not used to seeing that too much if you're just following like mainstream movies. And it's just beautiful to watch always the small size of humanity in front of nature. And I love landscapes in movies, and that's just something I wanted to point out also.
I will say as well, if you are a big fan of landscape, I heavily recommend Surat, because I would say possibly even more so than it was just an accident. Landscapes are the main character in Surat, and you'll see what I mean when you see it. Again, so that's Oliver Lax's. It's a Spanish-made film, but it takes place, I believe it was filmed primarily in Morocco, I want to say.
Cool.
It also is it is all about like kind of rave culture. So definitely, if you get a chance to watch that. I saw it at the IFC Center this past weekend. Highly recommend if you're a fan of that. Daniel, I wanted to say thank you again so much for coming on. I love having these conversations with you, because again, I love having I love covering like kind of not just foreign films, but obviously, talking about them in a different perspective kind of than I'm used to within the typical, because I feel like conversation around cinema is a language in and of itself. And so I love kind of being able to kind of, discuss and diversify different conversations outside of kind of, the American media complex. So thank you for that. Hopefully when this movie will win the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in a couple of weeks when the Oscars come out. Hopefully we'll be right back here again. In order to discuss the next big Brazilian entry. So real quick.
Hopefully we're going to have something next year.
Fingers crossed. We'll have it. I have a feeling we'll have it. Like, this has been too much of a train ride so far for us to get off at this point. So real quick before we get out of here, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs? Any social media plugs that you want to plug?
So my Instagram handle is Mazzadan. That's Mazzadan.
All right. And you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talking TV Podcast across all platforms. Make sure you're subscribed if you are watching us on YouTube. Check out our Spotify as well. Like I said, if you have not, be sure to check out all 5 of the movies that Neon put out internationally. If you have it, no other choice. Secret Agent, Sentimental Value, Surat, It Was Just an Accident. Please, please watch all 5 of those movies if you have not already. They are 5 of the best films that came out in the year of 2025. They are some of the best demonstrations by some of the best working directors that we have right now. So I cannot emphasize that enough. Please go and watch all of these movies in time for the Oscars when those come out in 2 weeks. And as always, people, you know the sign off that I have at the end of every single week. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We will see you guys next time.